Welcome to the Accelerate Campfire. I'm Lyndon Bowen, and today I'm joined by an amazing entrepreneur. I truly hope you enjoy hearing their experiences and life path. Listen in. Taylor is the CEO and founder of Focusmate, a virtual co-working community with a mission to help everyone do their best work. Thousands of people in 193 countries worldwide sit side by side via video to keep each other company, cheer each other on, and hold one another accountable through Focusmate every day. A passionate voice on creating soulful work in workplaces, Taylor has been featured by The New Yorker, CNN, The Guardian, NPR, Fast Company, and Bloomberg Businessweek, plus many, many more. Let's give a warm welcome to Taylor Jacobson. Guys, drop in your favorite GIF, your favorite emoji into the chat and welcome Taylor. And we opened today off, Taylor, with like a really open and honest conversation. So I'm super excited for today. I'm always excited, but I'm super excited for today.
Awesome. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, great. So guys, the first poll also just dropped in the chat. Please feel free to, respond to that. Use the emojis to respond to the poll. That will actually be the question that I asked Taylor. Once you guys have finished that, Taylor, I'm just gonna kind of like pick up with our conversation that we were having about trauma. If you're open to sharing, like, what's been one of the biggest, pieces that you've learned about yourself that has like impacted your work as an entrepreneur?
Yeah. Well, I think probably the biggest theme is just understanding that um, procrastination. I'll go through the lens of procrastination. Procrastination is often just a subtle expression of fight or flight energy, being in a nervous system state of fight or flight. And fight flight sounds a little dramatic, but actually it's um what's going on when you're when you're procrastinating is you're having trouble being really calm and grounded and focused, and you have maybe an energy to do things, but you're struggling to follow through on whatever the most important thing is. And that's because when you're in fight flight, your body it has a lot of impetus to act, to fight or to flee.
Yep.
But your blood flow is optimized to your spinal column, basically to your limbs. So it's a kind of impetus to act that is not at all focused. And so I don't think we really think about procrastination this way. But we are all so constantly being stressed out by kind of, I don't know, just the way society operates now. Our bodies are basically designed to respond to stressors like, a lion chasing us or something like this. That's a very clear and acute danger that then passes, and then we return to a safe state. And
Yep.
the constant simulation we experience and the complexity of our lives today is so much higher too, that you can be just worried about like all kinds of things at the same time. And so the result of that is we're basically constantly in fight flight. And I didn't really understand that was what was going on with me as somebody who struggled with procrastination a lot for a really long time, until I started to have trauma releases where my body was starting to surface old repressed traumas. And this is something that's completely universal. Everybody has some level of repressed, you can think of it as like repressed emotion, basically.
Right.
And generally that's fear. And so like the kind of normal expression of that would just be getting triggered by things in your life and feeling stressed out, but maybe more triggered than is appropriate. And we get so used to that we don't realize that it's actually a kind of old trauma related fear that's getting kind of activated by the situations in our lives. And I'll say for me, really, so this is actually something that happened after I started Focusmate. I started having a major trauma release a couple of years ago, and just lots and lots of fear coursing through my body. And I had to really like dive deep to figure out even what was going on and find the resources to understand and eventually shift that experience and kind of deal with these repressed emotions that were coming up and actually heal. But yeah, it completely transformed the way that I think about not just procrastination, but like all forms of behavior that is
Mhm.
undesirable is, I think, basically just an expression of these repressed emotions that we're either continuing to try to repress. It could be like bad eating habits,
You're right.
um, or what have you. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Taylor, I think that that's such an interesting perspective that you're taking there, right? You're kind of drawing a through line between entrepreneurship and like almost constantly being in that fight or flight mode, right? Depending on how you're running your business. And you mentioned that unpacking this trauma and confronting this wasn't something that you realized until after you started Focusmate, or maybe not to the same degree until after you started Focusmate. Could you kind of put us into the mind frame of like what you were doing before you launched Focusmate?
Yeah. Well, the story does begin with a different period of struggle where I started working remotely for the first time about 10 years ago, and I almost got fired from that job because I struggled so much. Um, and just the process of, well, number one, I felt very humiliated, I'll say,
Mhm.
by that experience. It was the first really conspicuous failure where I just quit the job because I didn't want to get fired.
Yep.
And I started working on stuff on the side, but basically I just went into this kind of shame and depression spiral after that, um, and I just needed to like learn everything I could to claw my way out of that.
Yep.
And so I started just reading a lot about self improvement, all sorts of angles on it, from the behavioral science to the nervous system to productivity to whatever. And at some point, I just realized that this was material that I wanted to focus on in my life and my career. And I wasn't really sure how that was going to play out in my career, just that was the path that resonated for me. So eventually I decided to go get trained as an executive coach, and that was going to be my first way to apply that particular set of interests professionally. And I did that for a number of years. Um, and I learned a lot more about other people who are struggling, because my job basically was to create a safe space for people to talk about whatever
Right.
their
Right.
biggest struggles were. And it was pretty interesting to see how even really high performing people actually share this problem of just not following through on the things that matter most to them.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that that's my brain is just drawing lines right now. Like, was that the impetus or the idea behind building what you've built, like bringing thousands of people together, 193 countries to help each other, accomplish those goals? Like, was that the idea behind Focusmate? Kind of like, oh well, I'm more accountable when I'm leaning on someone. How can I build a system of accountability for other entrepreneurs? What
Yeah,
was your kind of idea? Mhm.
honestly, it wasn't that intentional. I had a client who was in like a peer group that I was running, and he was just sharing with me that he was really struggling to put together a pitch deck, an investor pitch deck, and the deadline was coming up, and he was just starting to freak out. And um, he and I had an intimate enough relationship that I decided to share with him this kind of fantasy that I had, that I had kind of always wanted to work with somebody in this way of getting on a video call, or it could be at a cafe, it could be at a library, it could be on a video call, but basically just having somebody there with me where we each share what we're going to do and then just keep each other company while we're doing it. And I couldn't even tell you when I first had that idea, because I probably kept it to myself for a while, because I just thought like there's something wrong with me that I want that level of support. And then I just was in this moment with this guy, Jake, and I felt safe enough to be like, hey, maybe this would help you. And I've always wanted to try this. So I just proposed to him that we get on a Skype call. This was Skype days, and and do it. And so we got on Skype. We shared what we were going to work on. He was working on his presentation, obviously, and I was working on a blog post actually. And it just was like magic. It just really, really worked.
Just click.
And then that's the moment when it clicked to me, like, wow, if this worked so well for the two of us, I just was like, there definitely are millions of people out there who are going to want to try this. Yeah.
Right. And I know we talked a little bit before about you not using social media as much, and trying to refrain from those type of applications. How did you decide on Facebook being one of the platforms for you to build Focusmate out on?
Um, yeah, probably not a super scientific decision.
Hmm.
Just knowing that that's where people are. People are on Facebook.
Straightforward.
When I started doing the sort of initial customer development for Focusmate, I was just going into other Facebook groups and talking about this challenge and this idea of of getting on a call and holding each other accountable and just asking other people, hey, would you be interested in trying this out? And so yeah, just kind of leveraging the fact this is where people already are. This is where the conversation is happening. The kind of research on potential customers, and it's a decent tool for community building. Actually, yeah.
Mm.
And people like to give Facebook flack, and I'm probably one of those. But yeah, Facebook groups are pretty good for building
Yeah,
community.
yeah. No, they are. They're pretty good. They're pretty good. Um, uh, what was like the process of like kind of convincing the first user outside of Jake, that you mentioned to like hop on a room with somebody who they don't know, and to like work together? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, so I alluded to it a little bit actually. I would go into Facebook groups for like freelancers, other people that I thought would have this problem of of working in isolation. And I'd just post and I'd say, hey, me and a friend have been trying this experiment uh, where we get on a video call and we share what we're doing, and then we just hold each other accountable while we do it. Would anyone else like to try that? And then just seeing a bunch of comments come through of people saying, sure, would love to try it. Sounds awesome. Um, Putting up a form for people to share a little bit more about their experiences with procrastination, why it was interesting to them, just like customer research questions.
Right.
So by the time I'd done all those things, I started to have dozens of people who had expressed clear interest in trying this out. And so when we started, it was just a Facebook group, and you had to post times in the group that you were interested, and people would respond and say, hey, I'm down. And then you would like swap Skype IDs, and it was all very manual. So yeah, there was no convincing. It was just going and finding
Organic.
people and seeing if they wanted to do
Yeah.
it, and then saying, okay, let's do it.
Uh, that's interesting. Like I think particularly like the bootstrap way in which you took an idea and executed on it, and then like obviously Focusmate is way more complicated in terms of like how you meet and match with people all over the world now. But it began, like you said, in a simple Facebook group by sending just your Skype ID and booking a time, which is just like crazy to imagine the difference from then to now, right?
Yeah, but I think there's a lot that's important about that in the entrepreneurial journey, which is like if you find a problem that's painful enough for people, they're definitely willing to do a bunch of annoying things in order to have it solved. And I learned that lesson some hard ways in other entrepreneurial endeavors where it's just so easy to get like wrapped up in how good your idea is that you're not actually paying attention to, are you delivering something people want, as YC would say? Are you solving a really painful problem? Because if you are, then yeah, people will do
Yeah,
ridiculous things like that. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think that's an amazing point, Taylor. Um, We have another question from the audience here, which is they're curious to know, like, along your journey of starting Focusmate and the other entrepreneur endeavors that you've done, um, what would you say has been your biggest mistake in your journey so far?
Interesting. I don't, in some level, it's like you just make so many mistakes,
Mm,
and that's such a integral part of the process that I don't pay that much attention to what I think mistakes are. I mean, sometimes there's mistakes that maybe feel more shameful or something like that, but um yeah, I've made a lot of big mistakes. I think it's you don't even necessarily want to think about them as mistakes because they're so necessary, but one of the hardest things for me has always been building the team and hiring. And when you really like somebody, when they're really talented, when they're really passionate, but they're just not a good fit for whatever reason. It's
mhm,
like it could be like a romantic relationship where it's like you're lovable, they're lovable, and it's just you're not quite right for each other. So there's one team member that it was like that. We just really loved each other, and yet we kept him on. He stayed on, sort of a mutual responsibility for probably a year after we knew it wasn't really working, and just trying to force it, like really working really hard to try to make it work instead of just acknowledging, like, yeah, this is like we're working too hard to make this work. So I would never frame that as a mistake. It's such a valuable lesson, and it's somebody that I'm still close with. But yeah, that comes to mind.
yeah. I mean, I love that question particularly because it's a bit of a trick question for entrepreneurs. Everyone always comes in and it's like, oh, I'm just gonna throw the framing away, right? And I love that entrepreneurs never fall into the trap of answering a question the way that it's posed. Thank you, Taylor. We had a follow up question from one of our audience members. What was your biggest surprise?
Gosh, I don't know that there has been a surprise, and I say that because with Focusmate, it's really the first time with an entrepreneurial endeavor that I just committed 100%,
Hmm.
and it's sort of I don't think I'd ever had that experience in my life of committing to anything 100%.
Wow.
And it just shifts your context when you experience things as just like not that big of a deal. But let's see, biggest surprise. I mean, one maybe pleasant surprise is actually that I feel like I've hit my stride more as we've grown. Where I sort of at first was more intimidated by the idea of growing and like having more people on the team and more complexity, more things happening, um, and like, am I gonna be good enough to handle that challenge? And it's sort of a pleasant surprise to discover that actually one of my strengths is building a team and delegating and empowering other people and seeing other people's gifts and helping them see their gifts. And um, so that was something that was scary that actually turned out to be, it has continued to be really a pleasant surprise. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That is, I love that. And Alyssa quoted that helping other people see their gifts, which I definitely think is something as a leader, as a CEO, is extremely invaluable, right? You mentioned, finding the right team. You mentioned cultivating that relationship. All things that I think entrepreneurs absolutely need to do if they're trying to grow their organization outside themselves. Kind of like on the theme of like advice that you would give to um, entrepreneurs. We've given a little kind of like a snippet of it, but more. I want to ask you the question more pointedly. What is some other pieces of advice that you would share with entrepreneurs looking to grow, expand, or looking to get into something new?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I really like the Peter Drucker, like culture eats, I don't know if this is what he said, culture eats strategy for breakfast,
Mm,
something like that. I know that I keep hitting these breaking points in terms of what I'm capable of doing on my own. And that's been a really hard transition of like, no, you aren't going to work on this project. Somebody else is going to work on it. Um, and even just the depth of my input on certain strategic choices. There's just so many things that I can't be involved with at the depth that my ego maybe would want to be involved with. And yet we've built a culture that it like people are so passionate, they're so desiring to serve our community that like I know how hard they're thinking about what's the right solution. There's just so much that I don't have to worry about or think about because our culture is what it is. And so the way that, that trickles down into good decision making is really where the value is. Like you could have an amazing strategy and people aren't thinking that critically and they're not collaborating very well and they're not going the extra mile for customers and all these things that like, man, the devil's really in the details. Like when that some modal pops up in your software, how does the customer feel? And I think it's easy to get into this headspace of just like, oh, just get it done. Like we have to have this modal. But is somebody thinking really deeply about what the impact is? And, we want somebody to feel delighted or relieved or whatever it is. So yeah, that's the impact. That's the impact of culture. It's like leveraging yourself, far, far more than you ever could without it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's a really big point. Culture is something that we haven't had quite a broad conversation about. So I appreciate you, really bringing that to the forefront, particularly for our entrepreneurs here that are looking to grow their operations and even thinking about plans beyond themselves inside of their company. So, Taylor, I just want to say thank you so much for all the advice and perspective that you've given us here today. Guys, just please give Taylor a warm GIF slash emoji. Thank you here in the chat. Taylor, thank you. Is there anything else last that you'd like to leave us with? If not, we can end off on a really high note.
No, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, would love to have any of you all check out Focusmate. It's a really warm, inclusive, supportive community. And if you do, I'd love to just hear what your experience is like.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Taylor, so much, and thank you guys for joining us here for yet another campfire. We'll see you guys next week. Thank you. If you'd like to join the Accelerate Collective and attend future campfires, visit accelerateamerica.com/join and check out our future guest at accelerateamerica.com/campfire. Take care.